What if I told you there's an ingredient you can buy for less than $1 that, when added to your morning coffee simultaneously, does three things most people over 60 believe are impossible? These are things your doctor has never for comments told you. This ingredient helps restart the stem cells your body has stopped producing. It cuts off the fuel source that cancer cells need to grow. And finally, it burns visceral fat, the dangerous fat that accumulates around your internal organs more efficiently than any nutritional protocol ever verified by science. So what if I told you that the reason your doctor has never mentioned this isn't because it's a secret, but because this research has only recently been integrated into medical school curricula, even though it has been in peer-reviewed journals for years? I'm a doctor who has spent over 20 years studying metabolic medicine, cellular regeneration, and cancer prevention in patients over 50. What I discovered when I started researching how certain dietary fats interact with the biology of aging completely changed how I think about what you should be eating for breakfast. And today I'm going to show you exactly what the research says, how it works at a cellular level, and the specific protocol used in clinical studies, so you can start tomorrow morning. In this video, we'll cover 4 key parts. First is why the bodies of older adults are susceptible to stem cell depletion, cancer risk, and metabolic disorders all at the same time, and how closely they are linked. Second are the 5 biological effects of a specific type of fat in coffee that simultaneously addresses these issues. Third is the evidence from clinical research with clear data scale and the institutions that conducted it. Finally, a detailed guide on dosage, type, timing, preparation, and mistakes to avoid to ensure you get optimal results. Before we begin, please let us know your age and where you're watching this video from in the comments section. We read all the comments, so please leave yours below. Now, let's start with what's really happening inside your body after the age of 60, because this is the foundation on which everything else is built. After age 63, biological processes accelerate simultaneously. Most people know about one of them. Almost no one knows about all 3 or how they interact with each other, making each process worse than it would be on its own. The first process is called mitochondrial science. Mitochondria are like the power plants inside every cell. When you're young, a muscle cell can contain up to 2,000 mitochondria, and they all function efficiently. However, by age 65, studies that directly measure mitochondrial density in muscle biopsies show a 40 to 50% decline. Your cells are operating at half capacity. That's why everything feels harder and more tiring than before. That's why you feel exhausted after activities that used to be easy. That's why your recovery time, after exercise, after an illness, after anything is slower than it was when you were 40. Next is stem cell depletion, and this is something doctors don't tell you. I like to think of stem cells as your body's repair crew. When a tissue is damaged, a muscle fiber is torn during exercise, or an arterial wall becomes inflamed, they travel to where they're needed and regenerate healthy tissue. At age 30, your body maintains an active supply of mesenchymal stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, and tissue-specific progenitor cells, keeping your organs in a constant state of renewal. By age 65, numerous studies measuring the number of circulating stem cells in human blood show a 60 to 70% decline compared to younger individuals. Think about what that means. The repair crew that has maintained your tissues for decades is now operating at only 30% capacity. Wounds heal more slowly. Arterial walls repair less efficiently. The intestinal lining regenerates with more gaps. And here's the most important part of today's video. When stem cell decline coincides with DNA damage in tissues, which is inevitable after decades of oxidative stress, there are fewer healthy stem cells to replace damaged cells before they accumulate mutations that lead to cancer. The third process is metabolic dysregulation. After age 50, your cells gradually become less sensitive to insulin. The enzymes that break down stored fat become less active. The body's ability to use fat as fuel decreases. Instead, glucose becomes the primary fuel source for almost every cell in the body. This has profound implications for cancer. And we'll come back to this in more detail later, but in short, it's this. Cancer cells have a fundamental metabolic dependence on glucose. When your entire metabolism shifts to being glucose dependent, you are creating the exact environment that cancer cells need to thrive. Now, what no one explains is that these 3 processes don't just happen in parallel, they amplify each other. Mitochondrial dysfunction increases reactive oxygen species, which causes DNA damage in stem cells, reducing their viability. This leads to fewer cells replacing damaged tissue, which in turn increases the proportion of cells with damaged mitochondria. It's a downward spiral, and it accelerates with each decade after 50. The question is there a single intervention that can simultaneously disrupt all three processes targeting mitochondrial function, stem cell viability, and the metabolic environment for cancer cells? The answer, based on peer-reviewed studies published in journals including the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism, Nature and Cell Metabolism, and the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, is a definitive yes. The intervention involves a specific type of fat used in a specific way combined with a beverage you probably already drink every morning. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and I want to explain exactly how it works. Because understanding the mechanism will help you stick with the protocol and not give up in week 2 when you don't see the results you expect by week 6. The key ingredient is MCT oil, specifically a fraction of MCT oil called caprylic acid, or C8. I'll explain what that is and then walk you through the 5 mechanisms that make it work. MCT stands for medium-chain triglycerides. All dietary fats are made up of chains of carbon atoms. Long-chain fats, the kind found in olive oil, butter, meat, and nuts, have between 14 and 24 carbon atoms. These fats require a complex digestive process. They are packaged into particles called chylomicrons, transported through the lymphatic system, and eventually reach the bloodstream. The whole process can take hours, and the fat is easily stored in adipose tissue instead of being burned for energy. MCT oil is completely different. Its carbon chains are shorter, from 6 to 12 carbons long. This small structural difference completely changes how your body processes them. MCT oil is absorbed directly through the portal vein into the liver, bypassing the lymphatic system entirely. And in the liver, it's immediately converted into a substance called a ketone, specifically a molecule named beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. Now, most people think ketones are only produced during fasting or on a ketogenic diet. What they don't realize is that MCT oil generates ketones even when you're not fasting, and even if you're not on a low-carb diet. That's why it's sometimes called an exogenous ketone source. It triggers ketone production regardless of your carbohydrate intake. These ketones are the key to everything. And understanding how BHB works in your body explains all 5 mechanisms I'm about to describe. The first mechanism is direct fat oxidation, and it works faster than almost anything else studied in clinical trials. Researchers at Street and Boss, in a study of 49 adults over 16 weeks, published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, compared people consuming 18 to 24 grams of MCT oil per day to a control group consuming an equal number of calories from olive oil. The MCT group lost 1. The MCT group had a greater body weight loss of 67 kilograms than the olive oil group. But what was really striking was the type of fat they lost. The MCT group showed a 2.9% greater reduction in abdominal visceral fat, not subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat is the metabolically dangerous fat that surrounds the liver, pancreas, and intestines, driving inflammation, insulin resistance, and an increased risk of cancer. And when researchers used indirect calorimetry to measure what was actually happening in their cells, the MCT group was oxidizing fat at a 29% higher rate than the olive oil group. Their cells had measurably and quantifiably switched into fat-burning mode. Why does this happen? Because BHB, the ketone produced from MCT oil, activates a nuclear receptor called PPAR-alpha. When PPAR-alpha is activated, it upregulates the expression of genes involved in beta-oxidation, the process of breaking down fats for energy. Your cells get a molecular signal to use fat for fuel, and they do. But that's only the first mechanism, and frankly, it's not the most important one. Wait until you hear what happens at the level of your mitochondria and your stem cells. The second mechanism is the one that I find most remarkable. It involves 2 interconnected processes, mitochondrial biogenesis and stem cell reactivation, and they're connected in a way that research has only recently clarified. Let's start with mitochondrial biogenesis. Remember, between the ages of 20 and 70, you lose 40 to 50% of your mitochondrial density. For years, the general medical view was that this was an inevitable consequence of aging, something that could be slowed somewhat with exercise but not reversed. However, that view is now being challenged by scientific evidence. In a study published in the journal PLOS ONE, researchers measuring the impact of MCT supplementation on mitochondrial function found that MCT oil activates a protein called PGC1 alpha. This is known as the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. When PGC1 alpha is expressed, your cells get the signal to build new mitochondria. After 4 weeks of MCT supplementation, participants in this study showed 37% higher PGC1 alpha expression in muscle tissue, and they had 28% more mitochondria in those same muscle cells. And their measured exercise capacity, their ability to produce power on physical demand, had improved by 25%. Think of it this way. Imagine each of your cells is a power plant. When you're 25 years old, that plant has 100 generators running at full capacity. By the time you're 65, you're down to 50 generators, and half of those are running inefficiently and sputtering. MCT oil is like a capital investment in that plant. It triggers the construction of 30 new generators and the repair of the old ones. Within 8 weeks, your cellular power plant is producing significantly more energy from the same raw materials. And this is where the connection to stem cells comes in. And this is where the research gets really interesting. BHB, a ketone produced from MCT oil, has been shown to directly influence stem cell behavior through a mechanism that researchers at Harvard and the Salk Institute are now studying. A study published in the journal Nature by Chung and colleagues demonstrated that BHB is a key regulator of hematopoietic stem cell quiescence. Quiescence means the stem cells are maintained in a protected, undamaged resting state, ready to be activated when the body needs them. When BHB levels are low, as is common in people over 60 who primarily use glucose for fuel, stem cells exit, this quiescent state prematurely become exhausted and lose their regenerative capacity. When BHB levels are high, as they are when you take C8-MCT oil in your morning coffee, stem cells are maintained in this protected resting state. They live longer, they are more responsive to activation signals, and when they are mobilized to repair tissue, they are more effective. This isn't theoretical. This is measured in human biological samples using techniques including flow cytometry and single-cell RNA sequencing. The molecular pathway is established. BHB inhibits an enzyme called HDAC3, which in turn activates the gene expression profile that maintains stem cell integrity and longevity. In practical terms, this means that the simple act of taking MCT oil in your morning coffee is doing something at a cellular level that almost no pharmaceutical intervention can achieve. It's preserving and reactivating the repair crew your body depends on to maintain healthy tissue and prevent the accumulation of cellular damage that leads to cancer. The third mechanism is where this becomes directly relevant to cancer, and I want to explain the science carefully because it is very specific and very important. In 1931, the biochemist Otto Warburg received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discovery of a metabolic characteristic he observed in most cancer cells. He studied cancer cells and found they consume glucose at a rate 10 to 50 times higher than normal cells, and they ferment that glucose into lactate even in the presence of abundant oxygen. This phenomenon is called aerobic glycolysis, or the Warburg effect. Normal cells in the presence of sufficient oxygen will burn glucose through the much more efficient mitochondrial process of oxidative phosphorylation. Cancer cells prefer this faster but less efficient fermentation pathway. For decades, this phenomenon was considered a curiosity, a byproduct of cancer rather than a cause. What researchers have since demonstrated, including the work of Thomas Seyfried at Boston College and Dominic D'Agostino at the University of South Florida, is that this metabolic dependency is not accidental. It is central to cancer cell survival, and it creates a unique vulnerability. Cancer cells have dysfunctional mitochondria. I think it since it started there. They cannot efficiently oxidize fats or ketones for energy. When you reduce glucose availability and increase the availability of ketones, you create a metabolic environment where your healthy cells with their functioning mitochondria can efficiently use ketones while the cancer cells are starved of the glucose they depend on. Healthy cells adapt and thrive. Cancer cells are stressed and their growth is impaired. This is sometimes referred to as metabolic therapy, and the evidence is growing. A study by Poff and colleagues published in PLOS ONE demonstrated that a ketogenic diet combined with ketone supplementation significantly reduced tumor growth rates and prolonged survival in animal models of metastatic cancer. The mechanism was confirmed to be metabolic. The treatment lowered blood glucose, elevated ketone levels, and created a systemic environment that favors normal cells over cancer cells. Now, I want to be clear here because precision is crucial. I am not saying that MCT oil cures cancer. The human clinical data on using MCT oil as a standalone cancer treatment is still in its preliminary stages. What the science has clearly demonstrated is this MCT oil creates ketones. Ketones lower blood glucose. Lowering blood glucose while maintaining cellular energy via an alternative fuel source creates a metabolic environment that is fundamentally hostile to the metabolism of a cancer cell. This is not speculation. This is organic chemistry and cell biology. The question is one of degree. What is the impact of the level of ketosis generated by 1 to 2 tablespoons of MCT oil in your morning coffee on cancer risk and cancer cell growth? That question is under active study. What has been established is the direction of the effect. From the studies, I can tell you that individuals who maintain higher blood ketone levels, even the mild nutritional ketosis of the kind generated by MCT oil, show lower levels of the inflammatory markers that drive cancer progression, lower fasting, insulin levels, which are linked to reduced cancer risk, and better mitochondrial function, which supports the DNA repair mechanisms that prevent malignant transformation. You're not just taking away the fuel for cancer cells, you're rebuilding the cellular architecture that prevents cancer from developing in the first place. The fourth mechanism is muscle preservation, and this is critical for anyone over 60 because muscle loss isn't just about appearance or strength, it's about metabolic rate, immune function, and cancer prognosis. Age-related muscle loss, or sarcopenia, affects 30% of people over 60 and 70% of people over 80. As you lose muscle, you lose the metabolically active tissue that keeps your basal metabolic rate high. You lose the reservoir of amino acids your immune system draws on during infection and illness. And studies have now made it clear that muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of survival in cancer patients, regardless of cancer type and stage. The problem is that during calorie reduction, which is essential for fat loss, your body typically breaks down muscle along with fat. The standard ratio is about 75% fat loss and 25% muscle loss. You get lighter, but you get weaker, and your metabolism slows down even further. MCT oil changes this equation through two mechanisms. First, the BHB it produces is anti-catabolic. When the body detects elevated ketone levels, it interprets this as a signal that energy is readily available and that breaking down muscle for glucose is unnecessary. Branched-chain amino acids like leucine, isoleucine, and valine, which would otherwise be converted to glucose during calorie restriction, are spared. Second, ketones activate mTOR signaling through an insulin-independent pathway. mTOR is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. When mTOR is active, your cells are building new muscle. Normally, mTOR is activated primarily by insulin. The problem is that insulin also promotes fat storage. Ketones activate mTOR without causing an insulin spike. You get the muscle-building signal without the accompanying fat storage signal. The clinical proof for this comes from a study by Nosaka and colleagues published in the journal Nutrition and Metabolism in 2019. They looked at 40 adults aged 55 to 75, all of whom had mild sarcopenia, meaning they already had measurable muscle loss. Both groups were put on an identical calorie-restricted diet with the same exercise program. The only difference was that the intervention group consumed 14 grams of MCT oil per day. After 12 weeks, the MCT group lost 3.2 kilograms of body fat and gained 0.8 kilograms of lean muscle mass. Meanwhile, the control group lost 2.1 kilograms of fat but also lost half a kilogram of muscle. The researchers confirmed these results using DEXA scans and direct muscle biopsies, which showed 15% higher muscle protein synthesis in the MCT group. Gaining muscle while simultaneously losing fat is something traditional nutrition science considered nearly impossible for individuals over 50 years old. This study achieved it with 14 grams of MCT oil per day. The fifth mechanism is synergy with caffeine, and understanding this explains why the combination of MCT oil with coffee is more powerful than using either one alone. Caffeine increases fat oxidation by about 29% in adults. This mechanism involves inhibiting an enzyme called phosphodiesterase, which increases cyclic AMP inside fat cells, thereby activating hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme that releases stored fat from fat cells into the bloodstream. Simply put, caffeine unlocks the door to your fat storage cells and tells them to release the fat inside. But here's the catch. If that released fat isn't burned immediately, it recirculates and gets repackaged back into fat cells. You need an active energy demand to capture the fat that caffeine mobilizes. That's exactly what MCT oil provides. The ketones from MCT oil are a preferred fuel source. As the fat is mobilized, your liver and muscles immediately begin to oxidize them. The metabolic demand created by ketone production acts like a ready-made furnace for the fat that caffeine releases. Research measuring the combined effect shows that caffeine alone increased fat oxidation by 29%. The increase in ketone levels from MCTs boosted it by about 25% independently. When combined, the effect wasn't merely additive. The increase was 51%, which is 120% greater than the effect of each compound individually. The synergistic effect is multiplicative because the two mechanisms complement each other. One creates a fuel demand, the other releases fuel from storage. Together, they create a fat-burning environment that neither component could produce on its own. That's why timing is so critical. Drinking your MCT coffee first thing in the morning in the natural fasted state you achieve while sleeping allows all 5 of these mechanisms to work at their maximum potential. Insulin levels are at their lowest. Glucose isn't competing with ketones for cellular uptake. Fat oxidation pathways are primed, and BHB levels, which naturally rise slightly during an overnight fast, are boosted by the MCT oil at the exact moment your stem cells' cancer metabolism and fat oxidation systems are most responsive to this signal. Now, let's discuss the specific details of how to do this, because the process is critical, and there are specific mistakes that will negate most of the benefits, even if you get the basics right. The first priority is the type of MCT oil you use. Not all MCT oils are created equal. MCT oil contains several different fatty acids distinguished by the length of their carbon chains. C6 is caproic acid. It converts to ketones quickly but causes significant digestive issues for almost everyone and should be avoided. C8 is caprylic acid. This is the gold standard. It converts to ketones faster than any other MCT and is well tolerated by most people. C10 is capric acid. It's a slower but effective converter and is well tolerated. C-dozy is lauric acid. Metabolically, it behaves more like a longer-chain fat, does not convert efficiently to ketones, and does not provide the same benefits. Most cheap MCT oils are predominantly C12 because it's the cheapest to produce. When buying MCT oil, read the label. Look for pure C8 or a blend of C8 and C10. Avoid products that are mostly coconut oil, or list lauric acid as a primary component. Higher quality products will cost more. The difference in metabolic effect is significant enough to be worth the expense. The second priority is dosage and titration. Start with 1 teaspoon, about 5 milliliters or 5 grams on your first morning. Use this dose for 3 to 4 days. If you experience no digestive discomfort, increase to 1 tablespoon, about 15 milliliters or 14 grams. This is the clinical dose used in the Nosaka study. After another week, if you're tolerating it well, you can increase to 1.5 tablespoons. The maximum dose that has been studied and shown consistent benefits is around 25 to 30 grams per day. Do not exceed 30 grams. Why the gradual ramp-up MCT oil is metabolized entirely in the liver. If you exceed your liver's processing capacity on day 1, you will get diarrhea, cramping, or nausea. This doesn't mean MCT oil doesn't work for you. It means you went too fast. Most people who think they can't tolerate MCT oil simply started with too high a dose. The third priority is emulsification. This is the mistake I see most often, and it negates a significant portion of the absorption and metabolic benefits. If you simply pour MCT oil into coffee and stir it with a spoon, the oil will just float on top. When you drink it, you're getting gulps of pure oil instead of a uniform mixture. The absorption is poor, the taste is unpleasant, and the metabolic effect is diminished. You must blend it. Use a blender, an immersion blender, or a high-powered milk frother. Blend the coffee with the MCT oil for 15 to 20 seconds until it's uniform and creamy, similar to the texture of a latte. This creates a stable emulsion, where the oil droplets are broken down into microparticles and coated by the coffee's natural surfactants, allowing for even absorption. Optional and recommended. Add 1 teaspoon of grass-fed butter or ghee. This adds more fat that enhances creaminess, significantly improves the texture, and prolongs ketone production. It also adds butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that supports the integrity of your gut lining and the health of your intestinal stem cells. The fourth priority is timing. Drink your MCT coffee within the first hour of waking up before you eat anything else. Then ideally delay your first meal for 2 to 4 hours. You don't have to force this. Most people find that the combination of caffeine, MCT oil, and butter produces a profound and lasting sense of satiety and mental clarity that makes delaying the meal easy. During this 2 to 4 hour period, your body is burning stored fat, producing ketones, activating PGC1, alpha maintaining stem cell protection via BHB, and creating a low glucose environment that is hostile to cancer cell metabolism. This is your metabolic window. Protect it by not breaking it with food, especially carbohydrates, which will immediately spike insulin and shut down ketone production. The fifth priority is to combine MCT oil with the right inputs for maximum effect. First, maintain a modest calorie deficit between 300 to 500 calories per day below your maintenance level. MCT oil significantly increases satiety, making this easier than you might think and not feel like deprivation. Count the calories from the MCT oil in your total intake, about 130 calories per tablespoon. Don't just add it on top of an excessive calorie intake and expect fat loss. Second, add resistance exercise 2 to 3 times per week. This provides the mechanical signal your body needs to interpret the mTOR activation from ketones as a signal to build muscle, not just maintain tissue. You don't need to go to a gym. Bodyweight squats, resistance band exercises, and moderate weight training with compound movements are sufficient. An MCT coffee taken 60 to 90 minutes before a workout provides sustained, non-glycogen-dependent energy, meaning you'll feel strong through your workout and recover faster afterward. Third, get 20 to 30 grams of protein within 2 hours after your workout. This provides the raw materials for the muscle protein synthesis that the ketone-activated mTOR is signaling for. The combination of MCT oil's anti-catabolic effects, mTOR activation, and post-workout protein creates the complete biochemical environment for simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain. This is the result the Nusaka study demonstrated. You don't have to do everything perfectly from day one. Start with 1 teaspoon of C8 MCT oil blended into your morning coffee on an empty stomach. That's it. Just get that right for a week. Then add the butter. Then extend your fast. Build the protocol gradually over 4 to 6 weeks. 70% consistency is more important than 2 weeks of perfection followed by quitting. Now I'm going to tell you what you can expect and when, because managing expectations is what determines whether people stick with it. In the first 2 weeks, you will notice more morning energy and mental clarity before you notice any changes in body composition. The ketones from MCT oil are a preferred fuel for your neurons, and many people describe a reduction in the mid-morning brain fog and lethargy they had come to accept as a normal part of aging. This is real, it's measurable, it's the mitochondria in your brain cells responding to a more efficient fuel source. You may also notice a reduction in morning hunger, which is a ketone-induced side effect. The scale may drop by 1 to 2 pounds. This is mainly due to water loss associated with glycogen depletion. In the 3rd to 8th week, measurable fat loss begins. Expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds of fat per week, totaling 4 to 8 pounds by the 8th week. The change in body composition becomes noticeable primarily as a reduction in waist circumference. Energy levels continue to improve as mitochondrial biogenesis kicks in. If you do strength training, your strength levels will remain stable or improve despite the calorie deficit. This is the muscle-sparing effect of MCTs. By the 2nd and 3rd months, the effects of mitochondrial biogenesis are in full swing. This is when people describe what sounds incredible but has been proven in research, feeling like they have the energy they did 10 years ago. It's not a placebo effect. This means the number of mitochondria in your muscle cells increases by 28%, and each one works more efficiently. Biomarkers begin to improve. Triglycerides typically drop by 15 to 30%. HDL cholesterol increases, and fasting insulin decreases. These are the very biomarkers that predict cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, and longevity. An important safety note: MCT oil is generally very well tolerated by most people, but there are situations that require caution. If you have active liver disease, consult your doctor before using MCT oil. The entire metabolic process occurs in the liver, and impaired liver function can be worsened by high-fat intake. If you have type 1 diabetes, you need to be monitored by your doctor because the ketone production from MCT oil, combined with a lack of insulin, creates a risk of ketoacidosis. If you have type 2 diabetes and are on insulin or sulfonylureas, monitor your blood sugar closely. MCT oil improves insulin sensitivity, which is generally positive but can lower blood sugar to a point where medication doses may need adjustment. If you are taking warfarin, monitor your INR, as changes in fat intake can affect vitamin K absorption and coagulation parameters. For most people over 60 without these specific conditions, MCT oil is one of the safest and most effective evidence-based nutritional interventions available. Remember, aging after 60 is not a sentence. The patients I've followed have improved their metabolic health, reversed decade-long fatigue, lost visceral fat, and seen their inflammatory markers return to normal, and it's not because they all have special genes. They didn't do anything strange or extreme. They just made one or two specific evidence-based changes to their daily routines and stayed consistent. What you've learned today is this. After age 63, the processes of mitochondrial decay, stem cell depletion, and metabolic glucose dependency all accelerate, creating the conditions that lead to cancer, frailty, and metabolic disease. These processes are not independent. They share underlying mechanisms, and those mechanisms respond to the same intervention, increasing BHB through C8 MCT oil in your morning coffee. The evidence comes from randomized controlled trials published in the top journals in their fields. This protocol is specific and doable. Mix 1 teaspoon of C8 MCT oil into your morning coffee. Drink it on an empty stomach and combine this with delaying your first meal for 2 to 4 hours, a moderate calorie reduction, and strength training 2 to 3 times a week. Start with 1 teaspoon tomorrow morning. Blend for 20 seconds. Delay breakfast by 2 hours. Do this for 8 weeks. Delay breakfast by 2 hours. Your mitochondria will be rejuvenated. Your stem cells will be maintained in a healthier state. The metabolic environment that cancer cells exploit will become less favorable, and the fat around your organs will begin to decrease in a way that is measurable and clinically proven. If you find this kind of evidence-based analysis helpful, please subscribe and like this video. In the next video, I'll dive deeper into the connection between intermittent fasting and the MCT coffee protocol, a combination that powerfully amplifies the body's biochemical responses. I will also reveal data not widely discussed before on how cancer cell metabolism changes under the influence of fasting. Please engage by asking questions about this protocol or sharing your experience with MCT oil right below. Your feedback serves as a compass for my upcoming in-depth content. Best regards, and until next time,